Good morning. Welcome to Zenglop, the podcast. Music, poetry, psychogeography. Check out the website zenglop.net. If you are watching this on the YouTube stream, good morning. I'm waving to you. If you're listening to this on the podcast, good morning. I'm waving to you too, but you can't hear it. You can't see it. You can't hear me wave. You cannot hear my hand as it moves. It is the sound of one hand waving. If you're listening on the podcast and would like to subscribe to the YouTube channel, which you certainly should, you can do that by following the link in the show notes. So what are we going to talk about today? I had a number of different prompts in my notebook that I was looking at for today. I have a video that I'm going to be working on this weekend, part of the Decomposing Messian series that I'll be talking about. It's a bit of a tangent coming up. Instead of focusing on a chapter within the Techniques of My Musical Language book, I'm taking a break from that for this week only. We'll get back on it next week. And talk about some ideas about pianistic technique, which actually were prompted by Charles Ives. So I think, I thought maybe I would talk about that a little bit here today, but then I thought I would we haven't had a meditation notes section for a while. I think it's been a few weeks since there was actually an explicit meditation notes. It had some Socrates stuff last week that sort of fit kind of into that mode. But here's what I'm thinking about with meditation. And I would form it as a question to myself. I would say, can I generate a trend line? And if I were to generate a trend line, what would my confidence be in that trend? Okay, so what's the trend? There's a sequence of cycles, or a series of cycles that take place in sequence, but also in parallel. And those cycles follow a particular pattern that is similar, resonant within each cycle. That pattern, of course, is arising, abiding, and then dissolving. So my thoughts do that. As I meditate, I'm aware of the base posture, the base stillness of the mind, the base equanimity of the mind, within which the continuum of that awareness, thoughts arise, thoughts abide, thoughts dissolve. The degree to which I am attached or repulsed by those ideas is sort of one of the measures of the stability of the practice, at least where I'm at right now. That's one of the pieces of the practice that I'm scrutinizing, that whole dynamic of observing the thoughts and then observing who is observing and what's the nature of those relationships. And then within that, at the same time, of course, I am breathing. My body, my breath arises. I inhale. It sustains for some period, and then it exhales. My heart is beating. It palpates. It squeezes. It projects blood through the system. It relaxes. There's a pause, and does it again. There's a rhythm. There's all kinds of physiological, neurological patterns and sequences that arise, abide, and dissolve with the breath being kind of the longest of the immediate physiological. Then there's my own circadian rhythm. I wake up in the morning, and then I abide through the hours that I am awake, and then I return back to sleep. And then my sleep arises and abides and then dissolves as I wake. This transition between wake and sleep, where one dissolves and the other arises. And I can look at that historical trajectory of arising, abiding, dissolving, waking up, doing shit, and going back to sleep, falling asleep, sleeping, waking up. And I can project that trend forward, right? To a point where that trend will end. Now, I don't know the time or the place or the manner of the end of the trend line of my waking and sleeping pattern. But I know that it will occur. Just as I know that it began. Why would it stop there? You know, why would that be the only extent of the symmetry of the pattern? Why wouldn't I assume that there's then a trend of my initial awakening, my birth, my longer period abiding in terms of this body and series of events, and then the ultimate dissolution of that? It seems to me a pretty reasonable assertion that if a pattern has demonstrated itself from the smallest level of measurement that I'm aware of, up through the longest measure that I'm aware of, the limiting factor is my awareness, not the pattern. So the proposed trend line then is an ongoing sequence of sleep, wake, transition, birth, life, death, birth, life, death. Onwards into the timeless, the step that's beyond time, where the birth then is what? I mean, this is where the language breaks down. And the experience has to take hold. Why wouldn't I assume that? Now, I can make all kinds of other assumptions around what that process entails, and the teachings that I'm familiar with from Bon Buddhism have a lot to say about that intermediate state, the Bardo state. But there's also a sense that the Bardo state isn't just this particularly defined moment around physical death, although it certainly is that. But there's also a sense that the Bardo process is an immediate up and down, in and out, right now. Those cycles of sleep and wake, and in and out with breath, and twitchy little nervous systems, back down to the up and down of the thought, and the space between the thought, the emptiness between the thought, is a bardo, is a doorway. So let's see how I summarize this for the title page and the YouTube discussion. I don't know whether this really fits in with the idea of meditation notes. There's not a whole lot of practice there, but it's what I've been thinking about. We just finished a month-long session on Dzogchen, on the natural perfection teachings, and a lot of it really, really did resonate this time. I've been through that cycle a few times, and because I'm young and dumb, it always strikes. It's always powerful. It's always meaningful teaching. But then I come back to it a year or two later, in a different cycle. I realize, oh man, I know absolutely nothing. So then I come up with these ideas about trend lines and confidence factors. Yeah, it's probably kind of missing the point, right? Anyway, if you've made it this far, you absolutely should subscribe both to the podcast and the YouTube channel. So with that, keep your wits about you, and I will talk to you again soon.